Interesting. Things are getting very interesting indeed. Like I said at the beginning, I'm not a teddy bear. I am Monokuma, and I am this school's headmaster.
Hello everyone. Today I'm here to talk about one of the most controversial things I like, because people tend to not think well of this series unless they are a part of its community. And to be honest, I can kind of understand why. I found Danganronpa at a tender age. Back then, I read a lot of Famitsu and Dengeki. One of them mentioned it because of the game's original release in Japan in 2010. In 2010, I didn't have the means or knowledge to play the game, so I put the series on a back burner and went onto forums to talk about it. I first actually experienced the series through Project Zetsubo, which was a fan translation project that released a full English patch of the game on June 25th in 2013. So I have invested the full 10 years that the series has existed for into it. And because I've been here so long, I think I can play devil's advocate for a story I know so well and love so dearly. This game has contributed towards some of the highlights of my life. I've met friends that I fortunately haven't been put into a killing game with, yet. Hell, I met my partner because of my interactions with this series, back when Danganronpa 3 was airing in Japan, and to this day we still talk about it from time to time. So to say I have a sweet spot for the series is an understatement, but I do try to stay unbiased when I interact with media. So I know there are a lot of issues with this series, and I want to give a constructive look into them. I chose now to do this because the 10-year anniversary has just passed, and it has been a long time since we've received news for anything other than ports and figures or other kinds of merchandise. So the Goodbye Despair, Hello Stagnation videos will be my goodbye to the series until something new is born from it. In this video I will be going through the entire series, so there may be spoilers for media you haven't come into contact with. This discussion won't just be about the plot either. It will also go into how the series was handled, because that is a part of the reason we got to this moment with a stagnation that has lasted 2 years. We'll start on the somber note first, because I feel like it would be best to get the what ifs, regrets and disappointment out of the way first before we give the series the send off it deserves by thinking of all the amazing times it created. To understand a story split between multiple installments, you need all the parts to it. The Western audience was never given that though, was it? Some of you might not even know that there are many sections of the story that we just can't access well because of the legalities behind reposting copyrighted media and the language barrier because the series is in Japanese. That wouldn't be a huge problem if the media wasn't important to the central plot, but in one case of the many stories from Danganronpa that didn't make it to the West, one of them was crucial for the Hope's Peak Academy arc that was written by Kodaka himself. Danganronpa 0 is that story. 2 light novels featuring characters you don't think you know, but can change your perception of the progression of the entire series. It is the true predecessor to Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc, and it succeeds where Danganronpa 3 Despair arc neglects, giving us an accurate and focused build-up to how the true Ultimate Despair accomplished what they did, while looking into what drives that person. It should have been something that released so every fan could access it, but it never was. Yet novels like Danganronpa If and Danganronpa Hagakure were linked onto games so we could access them. A what-if scenario and Hagakure's adventures no one asked for were released with the games of a plot that contributes towards the entire narrative. The way this could have been resolved was by releasing Zero with the games instead. But the fans had to make up for where the team failed by translating it themselves, but because the West didn't really know about it, there are countless fans that don't know the full story because they missed out on Zero. But thank you to those who tried to share it with everyone by translating it. Hopefully, awareness of it can be spread more. Danganronpa Gaiden Killer Killer is another example of plot restricted to Japan even if it is less important. To me, there is no excuse for giving us useless stories towards the narrative but not giving us the pieces we should have towards it. Then there is also Danganronpa Kirigiri. Not only was it restricted to Japan, it was also stalled out for far longer than it should have been. It is not plot essential, which is why it likely never got a full fan translation. It only truly finished recently. But keep in mind, Danganronpa Zero, which is important to the story, is only 2 light novels. Danganronpa Kirigiri is 7 novels that went over a 7-year period, releasing just to hear how Kyoko Kirigiri got the burns on her hands. That story should have taken only 1 up to 3 novels at most. It likely was only given such an extension for the profits of Kyoko being a fan favourite character, which I shouldn't have to explain how scummy that is, even if it is a profitable concept, which was successful and profitable. They had good bait that we all wanted a big catch from. And to this day, as far as I know, it only has summaries online of some of the novels. The West doesn't know how it ends, and buying things over from Japan is pricey. Will we actually get a proper understanding of this novel? I don't know, but I refuse to give them my money when it's not the experience I and many others wanted. Now time for Danganronpa 3. Despite all of the good memories I have of it, it has so many problems in all of its arcs. Ultimately, all 3 arcs were rushed, and the writing didn't do every aspect of the story justice in the end. And Hope arc being a wildcard addition for the fans didn't actually help how rushed the plot was. That's because they included too much fanservice and attention to things just not important to the story. Despair arc is the biggest offender of this, so we'll cover that arc first. Firstly, the time used for the fan service of Class 77B that covered multiple episodes could have been used to build up the plot. Even if it was enjoyable, it did contribute to how rushed the plot ended up being. The main contribution it did give us was building up Chisa Yukizome, which did end up serving a purpose because Future Arc's killing game was actually hers. And she is easily one of the best original cast members we got through Danganronpa 3 along with Kyosuke Munakata, who she helps develop. But it doesn't change the fact that those precious minutes were ultimately wasted, which gave the directors and animators a crunch time to give us a conclusion with less build-up. It really makes you wonder if they believed in the story alone when they made so many gags with the precious time. I understand it aired on TV, and outside of the Danganronpa fans, that people would need something to latch onto the story and characters so they can partake in the experience. Even with that reason though, it isn't justified, since important elements of the story weren't even in it, and instead given references as little nods to them, like Yuto Kamishiro walking in the background. Then there's the steering committee that was overlooking the Izuru Kamakura project as silhouettes. And then there is the single panel of Yasuke Matsuda overlooking the parade in episode 8. All of those are references to Zero, which not everyone knows about, when Danganronpa Zero realistically should have been used in Despair Arc's endgame, since it is Junko Enoshima's key moment of despair. Though you would think by seeing the amount of wasted plot time they used on fan service character interactions that the cast should have been given justice, right? Not all of them, unfortunately. Mukuro Ikusaba got slated in Danganronpa 3 by her character being turned into some kind of sister-infatuated masochist. I wish I was joking, since it's such a huge contrast to the badass ultimate soldier who never got a single wound in battle. To this day, I don't understand how she was portrayed like this, even with so much little canon use in the series. If can't be used to fully deduce Mukuro's character because the writer isn't Kodaka and it is a what-if scenario. In Zero, she never came across like this, which is Kodaka's writing showcasing her. Along with that, they also got established facts from the games wrong. Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair gave us the Twilight Syndrome murder case, which was bound to appear in Despair arc, which it did in episode 3, but the events didn't happen like they were shown to in Danganronpa 2, which is a little weird, considering they had a linear path of how the events occurred, and it's not like they had to write anything. While I understand they tried to personify the events by looking more into the character's motives and behaviour, you can do that and follow the guidelines instead of forcing Hajime Hinata into an event he didn't need to be a part of. In Danganronpa 3's version of the events, we don't see girl A, B and C, Mikan Sumiki, Hyoko Saionji and Ibuki Miyoda, at all. We don't see the final confrontation with girl E, the murderer who is Sato, and guy F, Fuyuhiko Kazuryu, who lost his sister in this incident, so it didn't deliver what it needed to. Instead, the events were used to make a point of Hajime, which they didn't in Danganronpa 2, because it was nothing to do with him. There is also a debatably good or bad choice they made with how Class 77B became Despair, which is different from the impression that Danganronpa 2 gave us that Junko could have potentially persuaded them into becoming Despair and committing all the atrocities involving killing their own families. The terminology of brainwashing was used, but it's not actually clear-cut the means it was done, and the actual definition of the word is pressurizing the adoption of radically different beliefs. Danganronpa 2 doesn't tell us how it was done, and the meaning of the word itself doesn't specify on a method to do it, because there are many methods possible that could vary person to person. So it being a video that doesn't line up to what would make every individual in the world makes no sense, and Chiaki Nanami's execution in Danganronpa 3 Despair arc, regardless of how much it would make her class Despair, wouldn't push them to kill their families and act for the sake of despair, even with the subliminal messaging somehow integrated into live footage.
I love you, you love me. We're a happy.
But simultaneously, we do also know the characters well, and through that we know that they loved their families in most cases. So how would Junko have encouraged them to be so radicalized that they would butcher them for the sake of despair? Them wanting to see the world burn through persuasion alone is actually believable, since the world was screwed anyway, and there are also just people who would want to see the world burn. That exists now in a somewhat peaceful world, so imagine how many would in a world that got wrecked by despair. But to kill those you love through persuasion alone is where it needs a big reason why. Killing people of no consequence to you would be very different from killing someone with significance to you. Danganronpa 0 showcases this, and so does Danganronpa 1's final trial, when the cast realizes that they lost their memories of their classmates and the people being killed were people they were close to. Chisa's brainwashing, meanwhile, was far more realistic and understandable. She was lobotomized into associating murder with sexual pleasure by manipulating the brain's production of endorphins and/or dopamine when murder is committed. Endorphins are the hormone produced to relieve stress and pain, which can also bring feelings of euphoria. Dopamine is the hormone which creates the feeling of happiness and pleasure. Naturally, anyone would want to feel happy. So imagine if the only way you could do that even remotely was by inflicting pain on others. It makes sense someone who only feels any positive emotion that is through the suffering, death and despair of other people would be considered a despair and capable of the atrocities that were mentioned in Danganronpa 2's final trial. Another example that can be used for this concept done right is the Warriors of Hope from Danganronpa another episode Ultra Despair Girls. Junko convinced them very effectively. She prevented them from killing themselves by telling them that they could give their lives to her instead of throwing them away. Then she showed them affection that they were missing from their families, which is the reason they were willing to commit suicide in the first place. Then she proceeded to take it further by giving them the means to kill the people who wronged them now that they no longer needed them. They were kids, so they were easy targets to manipulate, while she also gave them the gratification they missed in their normal lives through doing the awful things which would positively reinforce the behaviour. In the normal world, they were abused and no one would help them. While when the world collapsed, there was no negative consequence for getting rid of their abusers and living however they wanted. While the despair video feels cheap, they would have needed a good reason to push Class 77B to becoming so radicalized to ruin the world and their own connections. It was a tall order to deliver on, but the means they created just weren't that good, to be honest. Now for Future Arc. Firstly, there is the fact they gave us a new cast to butcher almost all of them, which makes all of their development in extra episodes pointless and a waste of airtime. The main exception to that being Chisa. In every other case, the time could have been better allocated. An episode of Despair Arc was made to build up Seiko Kimura, Ruruka Ando, and sort of Sonosuke Izuyoi, and a lot of time in Future Arc was dedicated to them. But none of them survived, so that time was wasted, and was some back alley that we went down that doesn't lead to where we need to go. Meanwhile, with the Danganronpa 1 survivors, they get plot armor and we got faked out with their deaths. Some of the fake outs went making it near impossible for people to come out alive. We'll start with Aoi Asahina because she was the first fake out, but hers was the least offensive. She had the ketchup prank with the toy knife shown at the end of episode 2, but then shown to be a fake out at the start of episode 3. Next is Kyoko Kirigiri, whose NG code was passing the 4th time limit with Makoto Naegi alive. So her NG code triggers and she is poisoned, which is shown in episode 9. But she survived through Seiko's antagonist drug cure W, in a comatose state until Mikan found her and gave her treatment. An antagonist avoids or dampens a biological reaction, and it was foreshadowed that Kyoko had used it. We also know as a character, she wouldn't just accept her death without trying to survive. We've seen her push herself through Danganronpa 1, and that trait culminates in chapter 5 when Makoto takes the fall for her, but then she puts herself at risk to save him because he had faith in her and saved her life. We also know because of that act that Makoto committed that Kyoko did open up to him properly and believes in him wholeheartedly. That progresses into Danganronpa 3, so she wouldn't sacrifice him and didn't even aim to in Danganronpa 1. We can also gain the impression that Kyoko didn't know if the antagonist would work. From what she tells Makoto, she tells him that regardless of what happens to her, that he should never give up on hope, and that she'd always be by his side. And then we, the audience, get to see, as the timer hits, her affectionate smile at him as she drifts off before she potentially dies. The issue with it is the reliability and possibility of Seiko making a stable antagonist without testing and available resources, all while the murders were going on in a death game. It's very convenient, even if it is what we all wanted, because Kyoko of all people dying would have really sucked. And if she had have died, then it would make Koichi Kizakura's sacrifice in episode 8 to save her life for absolutely nothing. Then there is the final fake out death in the Danganronpa 1 cast, which is Byakuya Togami. Honestly, What happened to him should have killed him, or at minimum wounded him. At the end of episode 8, there is an explosion which causes the Future Foundation building above ground to collapse, while he is inside of it.
Are we sure about this? We'll never know the future. Nobody will. That's the way it's supposed to be. Hit it, Kenny.
Then there is Yasuhiro Hagakure, who the animators taunted us with the fact he won't die in most episodes of Future Arc, in instances by somehow dodging minigun fire from a helicopter, which should have been impossible considering the direction he was running, to where the helicopter was likely hovering, and the rate of fire miniguns can have. A minigun can shoot between 2,000 and 6,000 shells a minute, which means a minimum of 33 shells were shot at him per second. Hagakure should have died, and that's without mentioning how he wasn't targeted as a victim in Danganronpa 1. I find it hard to believe he was accepted into Future Foundation, considering they would know how incompetent and stupid he is because of Danganronpa 1. Junko gave them his recorded shitty resume. A really simple solution to this plot armor issue would have been at minimum to have killed Hagakure and maybe either Hina or Byakuya. If not, then get rid of Byakuya's fake out death and make it so the building collapsed while he wasn't in it. Because there has to be some amount of believability to the way death happens or is avoided in a situation like this one. Kyoko's is better off because a somewhat realistic reason is given to how she survived, and the stubborn persistence of a character makes it believable even if it is very convenient. Though on top of that, her death did feel like it was done to give Makoto character development, which doesn't help people's view of it. Meanwhile, most of the fanbase was in shock for years that Hagakure survived the first game, let alone has now survived the entire bloody series. Another thing wrong with this arc is a reoccurring issue from Despair arc. Within Future Arc, there's a rushed plotline that only got one episode. Most people would agree that it probably needed a game to cover, and the episode gave such a bad end to it. Ultra Despair Girls got episode 7 mostly to itself, to cover the ending of a story that lasted an entire game, because one episode is enough to do that while making it satisfying, right?
No, it's not.
Monica Toa was a legitimate threat in another episode, and yet here she just fools around and lurks to see what will happen because Nagito Komaeda made her give up on Despair, so she decides screw it in the end and goes to space where she's isolated and could die. The other Warriors of Hope receive no closure either, despite surviving, when they could have been used to confront or persuade Monica, and in the ending we don't know anything about them. We don't see any of them during Hope arc, so for all we know, they could have died off screen by the series end. Then finally, there is Hope arc, which was not a good finale, considering what the cast decide on doing, which is rebuilding Hope's Peak Academy. The place which was the platform used to cause the tragedy, participate in human experimentation and exploitation, and is where all their friends died after Junko inserted them in a killing game. On top of all of that, Kyoko's dad died in there and she was taunted with his death in Danganronpa 1, so would she really agree with this course of action? Would people truly have faith in Hope's Peak Academy ever again? It would likely be recorded in history as partially responsible for everything that went wrong, unless they covered up the truth. But that would feel like a betrayal to Class 77B, who took the bullet for them and Future Foundation by taking responsibility for the killing game, which only occurred because of Chisa and Kazuo Tengen, who were each high positions in Future Foundation which existed to combat despair and help the world. If Class 77B didn't take credit for it, then that news would have likely spread, and the people would lose their faith or trust in Future Foundation and its members as individuals. Hajime suffered firsthand because of the school, so it's biting the hand that feeds you to restore it after all the help they provided. Oh yeah, and then speaking of Tengen, he was shown in Danganronpa Gaiden to have watched the brainwashing video that we see Chisa give him in Danganronpa 3, which implies he became a Despair, which is why he tried to push Ryota to use his quote-unquote Hope video, which makes for a really bad antagonist because he managed to be more stupid than Hagakure. So he was used as the final hurdle for the cast to surpass, while the legitimate threat, Chisa, was already gone, making the climax worse. All of these points should serve my original argument that they rushed the ending and didn't give the series the justice it deserved. It could have been for a multitude of reasons, and we can acknowledge those reasons, but it doesn't justify it, especially considering the reasons aren't fantastic. The idea for why Danganronpa 3 ended up this way is that Kodaka was just an observer for it and was focused on working on Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony. Why I say the reason is bad is because they chose to do both projects simultaneously, and they chose to potentially neglect one in favour of the other. So any negative result from that is them reaping what they sowed. Now we can get into two of the series' biggest offences that both occur in its final installment. I personally feel that Danganronpa V3 is the worst installment for plot, but it's the best game in the series for gameplay. I know many will disagree with my view on its plot, but I hope you will hear me out for my reasoning. Firstly, we'll go to a gimmick used throughout the game that draws inspiration from Danganronpa 1's memory erasure and why it's bad compared to it. The flashback lights were some very advanced flashlights, which until the end of the game were given the narrative to be stimulating all the cast's memories to return. Considering all of their memories would have been somewhat unique to all of them as individuals, you have to have some suspension of disbelief to let the idea run its race. The phrase suspension of disbelief means to temporarily accept something as believable when it would usually be incredible or very unlikely, which is usually done to explore unusual ideas. Usually you allocate build up to your ideas and don't make them too far-fetched, so there can be some association to how it could work, and some genres like fantasy give more leeway for concepts. The idea of the same visual stimulus to trigger recollection of memory of multiple individuals is something I can suspend disbelief over, but that is not what is actually happening. If the mastermind was telling us the truth about the killing game and all of the people in it. Samugi Shirogane is our mastermind in this game. She explains that all the participants signed up for the killing game, just as entertainment for the bored masses who became so invested into the series, and that everything from the previous entries of the series was fiction in their world. There is some idiotic proof for why she is telling the truth, but it does showcase contradictions. In Chapter 1, there's a moment between Kaede Akamatsu and Shirogane, where Shirogane wears Kaede's shirt and seems physically unwell. It gets explained that she cannot dress as an actual person, despite her talent as the ultimate cosplayer revolves around dressing as something else does and portraying it. And she calls this terrifying affliction Cospox. If we believe her over Cospox and keep an eye on her during the final trial, where she isn't suffering from them despite dressing up as different characters from different entries of the series, then we would conceive what she is telling us as the truth. The issue is, if she is telling the truth, then she shouldn't have had her stupid affliction Cospox when dressing in Kaede's clothes, since she knows the characters of the people she was interacting with were just that. They were all just characters for the killing game, and not the actual people they were before. which creates the contradiction. And there's still the flashback lights, which you now can no longer suspend disbelief for. Not when it is impossible for them to work, until real-life science shows an example where it could be remotely possible. I'll explain how it's impossible with a bit of trivia. Did you know a study resulted in an article for Scientific American released in 2010, which detailed the memory capacity of the human brain? The data equivalent was 2.5 petabytes. As a figure, a petabyte means 1024 terabytes, or a million gigabytes. So the average adult human brain has the ability to store the equivalent of 2.5 million gigabytes of memory. But can a flashlight send all of that data in the brief moment we'd see it takes for the cast to get their memories replaced? No, it's just not possible for just one person. And for the entire cast, excluding Shirogane and Kibo, to have their memories replaced, it would take 35 million gigabytes for 14 people present, who would all need altered memories, and somehow the flashlight would have to allocate those memories to the correct person and ignore Shirogane despite she sees the light as well. It's way too nonsensical to ignore. For me, it took away my enjoyment progressively every time it was brought up in the story, even before it became so ridiculously unbelievable. So when that reveal happened, I was just disappointed, beyond belief. It's not even just that it's a bad gimmick, it also ruins almost everything you care about in the game. A big part of the games is the free times. They let you connect to the characters and usually invest you more into the game as a whole. But when everything we learn about them is a lie, then why would we care any longer? Well, that's the thing. After that reveal, I stopped caring about all of them, and it made most of the game a waste of time. The only characters with any value became Shuichi and Kaede for their choices during the game. Everything we learned about the cast, their backgrounds and aspirations, becomes hollow, but their intentions do not, which is why only those two were spared as likeable to me. On top of that, it disregards the rest of the series, which is more realistic, more memorable, and more connected to than this installment of the series. And then there's the message of the game, potentially associating us, the fans, with the nutcases in V3's world. It's like we're being insulted for giving Kodaka our money and faith towards something we like. The ending resulted in a split of the fanbase. Since I said this would be constructive, the fix I came up with for this game is a bit more catered to my taste. I reconnect it to the Hope's Peak Academy saga. The premise of the killing game being for actual entertainment would fall perfectly in line with the disturbed masses from that saga's world. We see Danganronpa Gaiden had killing festivals, which were done for the same reason and just for the sake of murder. And we also see the Neo World program, which was used to build a simulation where the participants' memories were removed, but with the hope they would come out as stable people, before it was hijacked by Junko's AI. So imagine if someone from the corrupt masses got a hold of that technology. It would enable them to create consistent entertainment without losing participants. Because if they died in the simulation, they could just be removed and then go back into the simulation in the next game. It would also make more sense of the memory replacement of the participants, since you can just replace files on a computer. An overly speedy replacement of a large file is more believable than visual stimulation resulting in memory replacement in the brain. And before anyone compares it to the memory erasing in Danganronpa 1, it's not the same, or really comparable, since memory loss is an affliction that can naturally happen, or can be caused by conditions, and Danganronpa 0 explains it. how Junko gained the means to do it, and the motivation behind it originally existing. My final negatives on the series are lower production value in the animes. Danganronpa the animation was ugly, and it was an adaptation of the first game, which is at minimum around 25 hours if you speed through it. There were 13 episodes, each were around 25 minutes long, which means around 25 hours of a game condensed into 5 or 6 hours. It suffers the same issue as all game adapted animes do, where it shears off content to fit the time frame, which dulls the story and the cast. Lurch did Danganronpa 3 mostly justice, with the animation at least. Despite the other issues I've mentioned about it, an issue both animes have is the English dub. Not all the voice actors returned, and some of the changes were terrible, Junko's being the worst of them, that turned her into an idiotic valley girl, which is such a stain on her character, since anyone who knows the series knows she isn't like that at all. The really bizarre thing is, the dub of Danganronpa 3 got both of her voice actors back, but both were used as variants of the voice of Seiko Kimura, one as the adult and one as the child, while they brought back an unfitting Valley Girl voice for one of the key characters. Do not watch the dub. Do yourself a favour and only watch the sub if you can. This wasn't something Spike Chunsoft was responsible for. The dubbing issue is purely Funimation's fault, but it affects how people view the characters and the media. So they should have casted better, or got a hold of all of the original voice actors and allocated them to their original roles. Do that before you cast for new characters. With all the negatives that I'm going to cover finished with, I bet a lot of you are wondering how this is meant to be a good send-off, when I've spent so long mentioning the issues with the series. To answer that, I'm going to ask you all a question. Would I spend so much time to explain in so much detail all of these issues and give potential solutions? Or would I even make a video like this, which took days worth of work, if I didn't care? If I didn't care, I wouldn't waste my time or breath. I mentioned all of this with the hope that maybe it can be learned from, and that someday maybe more will come from the series that will give it justice. That hope has existed for the 2 years of stagnation since Danganronpa V3 released in the West, and it'll probably exist for the rest of my life because of the good things the series has left me with. Next time we can talk about those moments though. I'm tired and my neck really hurts. Hopefully this video was at least a good watch and that my voice wasn't too annoying. There will eventually be a follow-up to this video, and who knows, maybe one of those friends I mentioned will join me. Until then though, I have a huge thank you to extend to everyone, especially the patrons, and a huge thank you to Alto, who did the art for my sprites. The link to her Twitter will be in the description, so check her out. While you're down there, I'd appreciate if you check the other links too, since it's always cool to see you guys appear on Discord or Twitter. I'm interested in your opinions of the series and how it ended, so leave them in the comment section and I'll try and get back to you all. I'd appreciate if you did like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you all again next time. Take care everyone.